It's the Premium Podcast, where we focus on breaking down risk management problems bit by bit until we find a solution. If you would like to discuss anything you hear on GPP with us, please reach out using the links in the description. Enjoy today's episode.
All right, Drew. Well, thanks for coming on the show. We're happy to have you.
Hey guys, thanks so much. Really looking forward to it.
Welcome, Drew. Drew is with InCite Performance Group, and so I think it'd be good for everybody, Drew, just to give your background, because you've got a few different perspectives I think we could pull from in this conversation with your background in the family business and then kind of what you do today, which led you to what you do today. And so maybe start there and we'll dive in.
You got it. So I have what we call in the insurance industry a non-traditional background. I do not come from inside this industry, which has been really exciting to kind of bring some outside in perspective. But briefly, my career started in a large multi-generational family business, which really means my story started well before I was born. I am based in Colorado, northern Colorado specifically. I am 7th generation northern Colorado, if you can believe that. My kids are 8th generation, which is pretty crazy to think about.
That is pretty crazy.
So my great-grandfather was a farmer in even more rural then than it is now, Windsor, Colorado. And as the story goes, he was also a very addicted gambler. And one of the outlets he discovered for his gambling is he would take his pickup truck and he would drive on what was then the dirt road of Interstate 25. He'd go to Denver. Sometimes he'd go all the way to Salt Lake City because those were the only two major produce terminal markets. And he'd fill up his pickup truck with fruits and vegetables. He'd bring it back to his farm and he could see what he could sell. And that was the very glorious start of our family's food distribution business. And
it's amazing. I did not know that story.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways, it's sort of that classic, American entrepreneur story. The business grew steadily over several generations, and each generation kind of had its story to tell, right? Of being on the cusp of not surviving and pushing through, and a lot of God's grace and great people that we had in our business, and really just a focus on our customers pushed us through. And so I grew up in the business working well before OSHA probably considered it legal, but started in the warehouse. And I have so many good memories of growing up in the business. To this day, I can't smell cilantro without remembering these Saturday mornings that I was at the warehouse, unboxing these massive boxes of cilantro and sorting them through when I was probably literally 11 or 12 years old. But at that point, we were quite large, and my grandfather was the CEO. My father was the vice president, and we were now a multi-regional distributor with operations and customers in several states in the Midwest. And so I kind of always knew at some point I was going to return to the family business, but that's also what I appreciate about the journey is it wasn't direct. I went away for college and did some other things, and then eventually came back to the business full time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so what was your experience in the business, good or bad, with purchasing or procuring insurance for the business? I'm curious to get your perspective as a consumer first.
Yeah.
And then how that led you into how you would, kind of advise agents today.
Yeah, this is an area I love talking about, because as I spend a lot of time here at InCite advising large independent agencies throughout North America, I really start with my experience on the other side of the table. The customers and the prospects that Eller Brock Norris deals with every single day. And kind of two factors there that really influenced how we bought insurance, and really only really appreciating these factors now looking back. The first was the industry that we were in. In food service distribution, risk management is not optional. If you don't manage risk, your business will not survive. And I always like to say, food distribution chose me. I did not choose it. I don't think very many kids growing up would have ever envisioned, being an entrepreneur in the food distribution space. It's a very challenging industry. Net margins on average 1 to 3 cents on the dollar a year. And so when you have that little profit that you have to manage, you really have to look at all aspects of the operation, right? And in our business, I mean, we were a transportation company, we were a warehousing company, we were a procurement company, all of these different businesses wrapped up into one where a lot of things could go wrong. The second layer of that is that we were so blessed to have a long-term relationship with both our P&C broker and our benefits broker, and they were two different entities. And really not until I came onto this side of the table, if you will, did I realize just how unique those relationships were. They were everything we advise our clients to be, right? The true risk advisors. There wasn't a major decision we made in our family business without seeking the counsel of our insurance brokers, because they were far more than that to us. We thought of risk management much more broadly than just the insurance policies we had in place. How can we mitigate risk? How can we better manage risk? How can we get creative about how we finance risk? All of those things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Looking back, what were some of the things that you feel like positioned those advisors to be in that trusted advisor role versus, just selling the insurance product?
Yeah, great question. I'd say kind of two major things. First of all was independence, and I'm completely biased. I'll acknowledge that. I'm pretty biased towards independently owned organizations. I've spent a lot of my career advising large Fortune 500s, so I have an appreciation for that ownership structure and how decisions are made and how stakeholders are managed. But at the end of the day, my roots are always in kind of independently managed and owned businesses. And so the fact that these two advisors of ours were themselves community-based and independently managed was a really big deal. Now, that means they had to come through on the second area, and that was resources. Particularly with our P&C advisor, we were for most of the time their largest client in Northern Colorado, and they always grew with us. It would have been really easy for us at a certain size to just kind of move beyond them if they weren't staying proactive in the resources they were bringing to table. I mean, things like, driver safety trainings and warehouse, risk management technology and food safety technology and looking at captives. I mean, all of these things where they were constantly staying ahead of us. And that was really important.
That's awesome. I think that's spot on. And, a couple things out of that I hope everybody kind of understands is, first of all, how you viewed that trusted advisor. I think what you said there was you never made any major decisions without consulting with your insurance broker, which, that's a huge deal. That completely changes the relationship you have with your client. And I think that's important for everybody to be proactive in thinking about how you can do that on a regular basis. Yeah. How can you drive that relationship with that client, be viewed that way? And then what you said there at the end is being proactive with your client, is staying one step ahead. I do think is another thing that can not only put you in that position, but also provide that value outside of just the product to your client. I think it's huge.
Yeah. And where you start this conversation, right, Elliot, as a risk advisor is so critical, because if I'm knocking on doors of prospects every day and I'm starting that conversation off with, hey, can I quote your insurance?
Yeah.
That really doesn't connect to me as a business owner, particularly the size we were of this large operation. We're spending millions of dollars a year on premium, and risk, generally speaking, was something that we thought about all the time. And it's kind of, that best and most effective way, if you're a risk advisor out there, and I don't care if we're talking about property and casualty risk, benefits risk, any and all, to be able to kind of start with, as an organization, where do you want to go? And what are those things that are going to prevent you from getting there? Let's start the conversation there. And eventually we'll have to talk insurance, but it's going to make a lot more sense if we have this broader backdrop to understand where, why, and how of an insurance policy.
Yeah, Drew. So that's phenomenal stuff. In the spirit of kind of our theme here, take us a little bit deeper into your story. Was it sounds like you had the perfect relationship, right? And so, like, how did that come about? Was it something that you guys had to groom? Was it something that they just were a super proactive, cutting edge agency at the time that you linked up with? Like, how did that happen? And then again, kind of like, how can we take what you learned through that process and educate agents today who are going out trying to connect with people? And I think that's a good topic to continue too, around just what resonates with clients today. Hearing it from your perspective, the way that you said, does quoting your insurance connect with a business owner is key. But I know I threw it a lot at you, but how did that relationship originally start in your family business?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you sort of a very anecdotal story on, particularly with our benefits relationship, because it's just a really unique one, and then maybe broaden out to kind of capture the overall theme that I think is there. So sometime in the late, it was about the mid 90s, we were approached by this, just this really unique entrepreneur named Hossein Shirazi. And Hossein had a remarkable story. He was an immigrant from Iran and moved to Greeley in northern Colorado, didn't speak a lick of English, and just was an incredibly smart person, incredibly hard worker. He put himself through school, business undergrad, and worked nights at the local supermarket, and got done with his finance degree and kind of stumbled into insurance and started health insurance, started knocking on doors. Well, one of those doors, and he went big. He just started looking in the phone book, what are the biggest companies in northern Colorado, and eventually, came to our business. And one of the things, obviously at the time I was very young, so I've just been told this story, but one of the things that really connected with our company at the time was just he wasn't trying to pull any punches. He was just very authentic with who he was, what his values were, what his business was, and what he was after. Fast forward 30 years, when we sold our family business in 2012, we had at that point a 30-year relationship with Hossein, and there are so many stories that I have of this man that would just, at the end of the day, he became a member of our family. I got in high school. There's early years in high school. It was about a year and a half long period where I got very sick. Long story, but basically it was this kind of immune disease that ended up me getting to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. Things were that bad. And at the time, my parents were calling to get me into the Mayo Clinic, and they couldn't get me in just because of all the red tape to navigate. And so Hossein, being who he was, gets on the phone, and within about 3 phone calls has me an appointment in 2 weeks. And I remember my mother's, talking to Hossein saying, "How in the world did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I just called him and said I was your dad, and got through." And the funny thing about that is Hossein has this incredibly thick Iranian accent. So he would not have passed for my father in any other context. But that's just who, that's the relationship they had. To him, it was what needs to be done, and we're going to get it done. So backing back out, Ryan, to your question, I think the relationship that everyone is after is a two-way street. Right? It's a partnership. So we have a responsibility as a business to take the recommendations that you're making as an advisor and to implement them. I mean, we have to take responsibility for our risk management performance, right? This is that whole idea of performance-based approach to risk management. At the same time, we're really going to depend on you as a risk advisor to help us see things that we don't see, to be experts in areas that we just can't be experts in. We know our business, we know our operation, but boy, are we really going to depend on you to help us see, particularly those emerging risks, right? Those things that might be kind of silent echoes in our industry right now, but if we're not paying attention to these things, they're going to become very challenging. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that as a risk advisor is you've got to have incredibly high business acumen, right? You've got to know and understand the language of business, and you've got to have a curiosity to learn, to grow, to be interested in industry niches, to know what's going on in the food service industry, so that when you arrive at a prospect's door, so to speak, you can ask intelligent questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a huge piece. We kind of coined it the same way. Just being genuinely curious can get you a long way, as long as you do have some level of business acumen to back that up. When they start, you ask them a bunch of different questions and they come back and start asking you questions, it better not all be for nothing. So with that being said, like, what's the quickest way to level up your business acumen? You're 2 years in the business, you're trying to win a big account, and you're going out, you're scared to death to be genuinely curious because you're not quite sure where your business acumen's at. What are you doing to level that up if you're in that seat?
Yeah, great question. And I'll say, a lot of my response here is shaped by this experience I had after we'd sold the family business, and I had taken over a piece of the family business and then run that for a couple of years. And that was a really unique experience, kind of my first major leadership responsibility for running a company. Went through some really challenging times, actually. We were a specialist government contractor, and things were going really well at the beginning of the business. And this was 2013. If you recall, the U.S. government decided to shut down for a long time, and literally overnight, our business revenue was shut off. So we had to quickly pivot. And fortunately, we were able to come out of that far better than even when we had started. After that, I went into some time spent in corporate strategy consulting, advising Fortune 500s on particularly on their innovation strategy. And both of those experiences combined kind of helped me see what is common to most businesses, regardless of the industry that they're in. There are some commonalities that you may or may not have a background in a particular industry that you're trying to build a niche in. And whether you do or you don't, you can still develop that big business acumen. I think of these things in terms of 3 sets of questions, Ryan. If I'm going to sit down with a business owner or C-suite executive in a business, I'm going to ask questions in 3 different areas. The first is I'm going to ask about their business model. How do they make money in their business? And that's really important because a lot of businesses make money in different ways. And if we can better understand that business model, we're going to be far better at identifying risks in areas that matter to any business owner or a C-suite. And that's how do you make money, right? If I've got a risk that's going to directly impact a revenue center or a cost center, you probably have my attention. So the first set of questions are business model. Second set of questions,
which I like that, real quick, not to interrupt you, but think about, like, you can't walk in to a meeting cold and ask that question. Like, that can't be the first question out of your mouth. There's got to be a certain level of rapport built and relationship there to be able to ask them, listen, I really want to understand your guys' operation. Walk me through how you're making money.
Yeah.
Which is,
and even
it forces them to get that relationship to a certain point, you know?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you know, something, as Elliot knows, we teach clients all the time is how to do this. And one of the things that I teach is for you know, before you enter a conversation with that prospect, fill out what you think would be the answers to these questions that you're asking with their business model using a very simple business model canvas. This is a term that's now quite popular through the work of Lean Startup, over a decade old now. If you go online and Google business model canvas, you'll come up with a lot of different templates that are out there, widely available. And the whole idea is, you know, simplifying a business model into a single page. And what are the core components of the business model? So take a stab at it before you go into this prospect, you know, hypothesize out what you think their business model is, and then ask some very targeted questions about their value proposition, about the resources they need to deliver that value proposition, about their revenue and cost centers. Again, it's that curiosity, right? We've already talked about. So business model questions really elevate business acumen in the eye of the buyer. The second set of questions are going to be competitor. You know, this is one of those that I think a lot of risk advisors, even high performing ones, neglect. Every business is going to battle every single day against competitors. And it's where a lot of risks can coalesce for a business that they probably don't spend enough time thinking about. So are you aware of this particular prospect or client's competitors? And are you able to ask questions about what they might do differently than their competitors, or how they can differentiate from their competitors? And the third set of questions are going to be industry, industry landscape. In corporate strategy consulting, we use the term ecosystem a lot to describe this whole idea that every business does not exist in isolation. It's part of a broader ecosystem. And why ecosystem is so important, guys, is because it's primarily going to be that lens that we see emerging risks take place, right? So take, for example, you know, just a simple example in manufacturing industry. Let's say you're dealing with a prospect who manufactures furniture, and you know, you start asking some questions about their ecosystem, and pretty quickly supply chain is going to come up, right? And not that we haven't heard much in the news recently or the last year and a half about supply chain disruptions and the risks that those present. I mean, those are very specific questions that a risk advisor should be asking.
Yeah, I mean, the commoners are talking about supply chain management today, right? Yeah. It's impacted everyone.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I think that's phenomenal. I wrote those 3 down for anybody. They should go back and listen to that again, because that's a framework in which you could use to build your business acumen. You know, which anything you can put a framework around is key. You know, ask clients or people you are interested in working with about their business model, how do they make money, who their competitors are, and what's the industry landscape or the ecosystem in which they operate. I think that's phenomenal. I love
It's
that.
very helpful framework. And Elliot, if someone just spent 10 minutes, I mean, I'm not exaggerating here, just 10 minutes, go into industry websites. What are the 3 to 5 most visited associations or websites in your particular industry? I guarantee with that framework in mind, just by looking at headlines, someone would be able to come up with 3 or 4 bullet points in each of those categories. Not to say that they're the experts in those categories. You know, that's something I've always appreciated about great risk advisors is they're really focused on asking the right questions, right? They may or may not be experts in a particular industry. And let me tell you, as a business owner, I could spot pretty quickly if you were pretending to be an expert in an industry that you weren't on. And I guarantee you, when I was, sitting down in front of a Fortune 500 C-suite or board, they just had this unique ability and took a lot of pleasure in making you feel really dumb if you didn't know what you were talking about. That's where questions can be so powerful if you just ask the right questions.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to that genuinely curious.
Right.
If you are genuinely curious about these areas, then it's just, you can learn how to ask effective questions, but you've got to want to do it. You got to know how to do it. So,
yeah.
Ryan, I was going to reposition it a little bit to something else that in Drew's background, but I don't know if you had anything else on that topic. Looked like you were going to.
No, go ahead and transition. The one thing, that I was sitting here thinking about, we frame things a lot, Drew, from the perspective of new advisors, but think about somebody who's been sitting in the seat for 20 years. It's stagnant. You want to reinvigorate your business, just make it a goal to go out and ask your top 5 clients those 3 questions next month and see what the hell happens. You might surprise yourself.
That's a great application, Ryan. It really is, because oftentimes, it's what we call the curse of knowledge, right? Someone has been in the industry for so long as an insurance broker, and maybe they've done really well, but they bump up against the ceiling. And we see this all the time in our work with producers throughout North America. And really, what dies off is that desire to become better. And it doesn't take much. It can be a spark, like you said, to go out and just kind of look at things from a fresh set of eyes.
Totally. So where I was going to kind of reposition, just because I know you well enough, Drew, and what you've helped us do, but you mentioned being proactive as an advisor, right? And, I know a lot of the work you've done is in the innovation realm, let's call it.
Yeah.
But, I think of that term is intimidating to people, right? Like when you think you need to be innovative, you need to drive innovation, it's very intimidating. And I've always appreciated how you approach that innovation, which I think goes right along with that proactiveness as an advisor. So maybe talk about your definition of innovation and how that kind of applies then to the role of an advisor.
Yeah. Great question. You mentioned intimidating, and I think for a lot of us, there's also this frustration, annoyance with the term innovation. What does it even mean anymore? Yeah. Right? I mean, who doesn't want to be innovative? And yet, do we ever stop to think about what that term actually means? And in a lot of ways, I've been wrestling with what is innovation my entire career. That started off, like I said, in our family business, where we were in an industry where you could make the argument, food service distribution, that in one sense, it hadn't innovated in 50 years. Yeah. It hasn't innovated in the history of the industry.
Yeah.
Move things from point A to point B. That's about it, right?
Yeah.
But in another sense, if we were to look at innovation a little bit differently, there was so much going on. And there were so many different ways to create new value. And Elliot, as you know, as you've heard me talk on this subject, it's really around correcting a couple of big myths about innovation that I think we need to start. The first big myth is that innovation is primarily about new products and technology. I get where that comes from. If we think about, I ask this question to audiences all the time, what are the most innovative companies in the world? And invariably, it's like the same 10 companies that are on that list, and they're all consumer product technology companies: Apple, Google, Facebook, Netflix.
That's why people think it's intimidating,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, if I'm a insurance brokerage, or if I'm a mid-sized manufacturing firm, I'm not any of those companies. I don't have that balance sheet. But if we think about it a little bit further, is it the products and technologies of those companies that make them innovative, or is it the way that those products and technologies solve problems for us? And if we looked at each of those examples, I guarantee you we'd land it. No, it's really the problems they're helping us solve. And so that's the first misconception. Innovation is ultimately about new creation of value. Okay. The second big misconception about innovation that I have run into throughout my career is that kind of the secret to being innovative is coming up with new ideas. And why that myth is so pernicious is because it sort of lays out this: you're either innovative or you're not. You're either born with this natural ability to come up with new ideas, you're creative, you're outside the box in your thinking, or you're just not. And so someone else needs to be innovative for you. Great ideas are where we start, but no company in the world is ever rewarded for a really good idea they came up with that they didn't execute on.
Yeah.
Right? And if we look at the data, there's actually an enormous track record of failure in the history of innovation. And I might even articulate that a little bit differently to say most great innovation is the result of intelligent failure. By that, I mean modifying, iterating on a series of failures till eventually you come up with something that really works. So to kind of bring those together, I define innovation as the consistent execution of new value for stakeholders. And ultimately, this is a very freeing way, an empowering way for an insurance brokerage or for a producer to think about innovation, because it means, first of all, anyone can be innovative. And second of all, by focusing on stakeholders, a whole new way of thinking about new value creation is opened up. Every business is going to have a lot of different sets of stakeholders. The most obvious one is their clients, absolutely, and let's continue to create new value for them. But there might be ways to create new value internally for our internal stakeholders, our employees, our associates. There might be opportunities, say, for example, in the insurance industry, where we as brokers kind of sit in the middle of the value stream. You've got partnerships upstream. You've got carrier partners. You could create some value for them, I bet. You've got downstream partners. You've got third parties that you rely on, that rely on you. You might be able to create some new value for them. Kind of this 360-degree view of value creation can really unleash some incredible growth.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to make sure we got to that too, because of everything you mentioned in there, that it can be a very little change, very simple change to a process, let's say, that could be very innovative for your client or whatnot. And it doesn't have to be, right now InsurTech is the big thing, right, in our industry.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's again where everybody's mind goes. It's like, well, I need to be innovative. You got to create some new technology platform or whatnot. And really, if you can save your client or your clients across your book, time in their day to get back to doing what they do best and not dealing with insurance, which they don't want to deal with anyways, that's innovative. That's creating new value. And I think that's just, it has always, when you taught me that definition, it always shifted that mentality in my mind that, it doesn't have to be some monumental shift or anything like that. It can be these small incremental improvements that provide value and that you do consistently that can actually be what changes your view when in the view of the client. I mean, what changes how they view you. And I think that's the most important piece. So
100%. And it's been so cool, even in, a couple of years, watching you all take this principle and really live it out, and all the unique ways that you're creating value for your immediate client base, right, as an insurance broker, but also more broadly within the ecosystem of our industry. And that's exciting, I think, ultimately, because now more than ever, there is opportunity to solve problems. I had a mentor early in my career who said, Drew, stop innovating, solve problems. And his point was, don't focus on the glitz and glamour of being innovative. And it's sad to say, but I saw this time and time again, working with large Fortune 500s who had all the money in the world to spend and thought that was the ultimate pathway. If we could just go out and buy the best technology or hire the smartest people, and they could do both of those things, that would translate into innovation. And ultimately, unless we're solving problems, look, I think we'd all say, yes, let's get the best technology out there. Yes, let's get the smartest people available. But let's focus where we need to focus, which is on solving problems.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, that translates to any industry. I mean, on a much larger scale, you hear Elon Musk talk all the time about how, I think he was making fun of who's making the electric pickup truck that's
Rivian?
popular.
Yeah.
He was making fun of Rivian because he's like, they're valued at some astronomical number. And he's like, all they've really done is come up with a neat idea. He goes, that company is going to make or break itself when it goes to manufacturing and scaling up. And that's kind of what we're talking about. It's like you come up with whatever you want to in the back room on a whiteboard, but until you have to make 1.5 million cars a year run out of that factory, then talk to me then,
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've shared this article with Delabrock Norris team because we do an assessment around innovation culture. And there's an article that came out a couple of years ago in the Harvard Business Review by a very well-known innovation researcher at Harvard named Gary Pisano, and it was called The Hard Truth of Innovation Cultures. And Gary's point was, and this is a man who's literally studied innovation culture in large organizations most of his career. His point was, when we talk about innovation, that ability to create new value and to execute, there tends to be this myth around all the positive aspects of innovation, the freedom to fail and the ability to come up with new ideas and, this decentralized decision-making structure. We used to call this in corporate strategy consulting, the whole idea of the sushi and ping pong table effect. Like, if we would just bring in free sushi for our people and put in a couple of ping pong tables like Google does, we'll have an innovative culture.
Yeah.
Well, what Gary's research has shown is that alongside of those positive attributes, there's a lot of tougher attributes that a company needs to really deliver on innovation. And those are things like high accountability. We have to hold our individuals and our teams accountable for the risks that they're taking. Incredible discipline in terms of how we run experiments, right? It can't just be coming up with good ideas, throwing them at the board and see what sticks. We've got to be very disciplined in how we carry out those experiments. And so, this is an opportunity for a risk advisor, I think, to identify another area where a company, irrespective of their industry, can really identify a risk, their own innovation culture, and be able to kind of identify some ways to improve and enhance that culture to ultimately pay huge dividends to their business model, to their bottom line, to their stakeholders.
Well, that's phenomenal. Yeah, and I would encourage anybody to read that article. It is it's phenomenal, really. So well, with that, dude, I think we're coming up on time, but that was great. I think there's a lot in there for folks to take out of and to go implement and really improve, what they're doing, what their relationships are with clients, how they can be viewed more as that advisor, and get out and kick some butt. So
that's right.
Appreciate you being on.
Hey
yeah,
guys,
Drew,
really,
thanks so much.
Really appreciate it. Great conversation, and I'm an avid fan of the podcast. So I'm not an avid fan of hearing myself talk. So I don't know if I'll listen to my episode, but I'll continue to listen to all the others.
All right, that's fair. That's a trade-off we'll take. All right,
take care, Drew.
All right, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Getting Past the Premium. We are excited to continue breaking down barriers and finding solutions together. If you would like to reach out regarding anything you heard in today's episode, find links and contact info in the description. Until next time, have a great day, and let's continue getting past the premium.